Hi, this is Evan Mulch, and I'm a member of St. Nicholas Greek Orthodox Church in Spartanburg. And I'm here with Nick Harakas, and we are going to talk about the early church history here in Spartanburg. Hi, Nick. How are you?
Fine, thank you. And you?
Good. Going back to your beginnings in the church, you started out in the church as a baby, if I remember right. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. And your parents, were they born into the church here in Spartanburg, or did they move here from another place?
Now, my father immigrated from Greece in 1908.
Mm-hmm.
My mother was born in Chicago.
Oh wow!
So they came down.
And did he come straight to Spartanburg from Greece?
No, he went to Aurora, Missouri
Mm-hmm.
for 4 years. And then Mr. Trachis, I think, brought him to Spartanburg in 1912.
1912. Mm-hmm. And then how did your mother meet your father?
One of those typical Greek
Okay.
arrangements, I would imagine.
So
she was in Chicago, he's in Spartanburg, so.
Okay. Well, so Mr. Trachis, Nick Trachis, he is known as the founder of the Orthodox Church in Spartanburg.
I would say, yeah.
What do you know about what it was like for him and the others? I mean, how many people did they start with, and what was that local church like in the beginning?
As far back as I can remember, was a little wooden chapel on his property on Pier Point. And that church burned in 1940, I guess.
So for about maybe 4 decades, there could have been this church that was built on his property.
Yeah.
Okay. So it burned down. And how many members do you think it had at the time where it burned down in 1940s?
1940, probably about 20 families. I would think that's what I've always heard.
And so at that point, it burned down. It was decided not to build a structure in the site where it burned down. It was decided to build the church on Church Street in Spartanburg.
Mm-hmm.
And do you remember anything that people told you about that experience when they were buying the property? And
as far as from what I've heard, Mr. Trachis had the property. And my father and George Babotas went to the bank to borrow the money to build the church with 20 families, which they got it built in 41, opened in November 41, I think it was.
And before that time, when priests visited, right? Or was there ever a permanent priest before 1940?
No, that wasn't even in 1941. We had visiting priests.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a priest that he came to Spartanburg, then he'd go to Greenville, then he went to Asheville. So he ministered to the 3 communities for a while. So
what was that like? Would you still go to church on Sunday if the priest wasn't there, or was it so you would just wait until the priest would show up in
we just had service whenever he was here.
Okay. And the first priest was very Reverend Emil. You're gonna have to help me with that last name there. Polas. Let's see.
I know it. I just have to look at it.
Okay.
Poulouropoulos.
Okay, I'm learning here. So he was the very first permanent priest in Spartanburg.
Yeah.
And he served for 6 years, it looks like.
Yeah.
And since then, and which priest was the priest that baptized you? Was it? It would have been before.
It had to have been a visiting priest.
It was a visiting priest. Okay.
Whenever they were in town, or they make arrangements.
And so since then, we've had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So 11 permanent priests, and it looks like in 1979 through 1982, we had visiting priests, and then from 1985 to 1986, we had visiting priests.
Yeah.
Okay. And so your dad helped borrow the money to build the current church that we have.
Right.
And there were about 20 families at that time. Tell me about Nick Trakis. What was his trade? So he was bringing in Greeks to work like your dad.
My father came down here to work with him. He had a fruit stand at first on Main Street, and that turned into a sandwich shop, a soda fountain, just progressively got.
Okay.
And then my father bought him out in 1921, I think it was, and eventually converted it to a full-service restaurant.
Oh, wow. So your dad may have owned the first Greek restaurant in Spartanburg. Is that?
Might have.
Yeah.
I don't think. Because Mr. Karaginas was here then, Mr. Zotis was here. I'm trying to think, Mr. Patterson, Miss Patterson, some other, I can't remember all the names. But
Okay. What did your dad think about his experience here in America? Do you recall? He moved from Greece and...
He came at age 13.
13, wow.
But he absolutely loved this country and loved Spartanburg. He really did. Very patriotic.
Was he?
For an immigrant, yeah.
Yeah. Well...
They went through some hard times, that first generation.
Were they really poor when he was...
Oh, yeah.
Were they were very poor, huh? Okay.
As poor as you can get.
As poor as you can get.
Yeah.
But they were still dedicated to the church. I mean, that was one of their...
Oh, yeah. They tried to hang on to all their customs and traditions as best they could. Once the church got established, and of course we had weddings and baptisms and different celebrations at the hall itself. I grew up in that hall.
In the small hall today.
The small hall.
Yeah.
That stage was built so the little ones, we could get up there and give our poems in Greek on the Greek Independence Day.
On Greek Independence Day, okay, okay.
I was 5 or 6, and I remember that. I still remember the poem.
So they wanted you to be very patriotic to not only Greece, but to the United States of America. They wanted you to understand the importance of loving the country you live in and protecting it. And you and I, we've got to know each other because you're a member of the American Legion and I'm a member of the Sons of American Legion. And so we see each other just about every month at the American Legion Hall. And are there any interesting stories that you can recall from the early days of the church, from maybe from your dad's time, if he ever told you those stories? I'm sure he did, but if you can recall any of those, or just stories from when you were growing up. Like, what was church like on a daily basis for you? Or when you'd go on a Sunday, yeah.
Yeah. I have to stop and think, because we didn't have air conditioning. We didn't have anything like that in those days. We had fans all up around I remember the old GE oscillating fan.
I probably don't.
Yeah. They'd move back and forth like this, and it was all the way around the church inside.
Was it? Oh, wow. Okay. It gets very hot here during the summer times.
Oh, yeah. Unbelievable. I don't know how we did it, but we did. We did. An interesting story, though. It's a sidebar from the first priest that came. What was it? Pulleropoulos. Young man. He was single. He was ordained already. But he fell in love with a young girl in the Greenville choir. So he had to make a choice. Either not marry her, and stay in the priesthood, or resign the priesthood
and get married.
Her. So we lost a good man, because all the stories I've heard from my parents and others, he was a great priest and a good man. We lost a good man. The church did, especially. And we've had some bumps and grinds over the years. You can see there. That's the interim priest.
Well, it's been very difficult for I'm sure every Greek Orthodox church in America to attract those who already live in America that aren't Greek. Because, for instance, when I first went when I lived in Cincinnati, I actually went to a Greek festival, and I didn't ask any questions about the Greek Orthodox Church because I wasn't even sure if it was a Christian church.
Mm-hmm.
Because all I saw on the outside was Greek Orthodox Church. I thought, well, this is just what the Greeks do.
Yeah.
And so there is a barrier there to the understanding of Americans on what the Greek Orthodox Church is. But this church did grow and had, and right now from 20 families, I don't know how many families we have today.
Probably about 100.
Yeah, so there has been a significant growth since the 1940s, and we've built the big hall, and I think the last couple festivals have just been record-breaking festivals for the church, which takes a lot of volunteer hours from the members to make that happen. Do you remember the first festivals, what those were like? I mean, how did those initially start here in Spartanburg?
25 years ago, we had the first festival. Well, other communities had been doing it, so we heard about it, of course. We figured, well, it's a good way for us to raise a little money and also give back to the community. Mm-hmm. We have the church tours when they come. They love the Greek food. Everybody just goes crazy over the Greek food, and it was pretty successful. We had a good from day one.
And there was no shortage of cooks in the church.
No,
making food was easy. Yeah. That was the easy part.
Just getting able to volunteer the time.
That was the hard part. Yeah. There's I'm sure so much you could say about we've got a dog here, so everybody what was it like initially when you'd have the churches from Greenville and Asheville visit? Do you recall when you were younger? Because that's been a tradition for a long time, right?
Well, we used to go to Greenville all the time because my father's brother lived over there. Mm-hmm. So we went to Greenville quite often. I didn't go to Asheville that much. Mm-hmm. But we went to Greenville quite a bit.
And did a lot of the members travel to other churches when there wasn't a visiting priest in Spartanburg, during those days?
Yeah, no, not really.
They just stayed, they remained here. I mean, that was a big trip back then with...
Yeah, well, you did jump, not that many people had a car.
Yeah.
To go, so...
Well, and the Greeks were very poor, like you said, right? So it wasn't like it was a huge expense.
Most of them around there were restaurant business. Mm-hmm. So that was 7 days a week, so...
Well, let's talk about you. And so you grew up in the church. You were talking earlier about, you recited poems on the stage there in the small hall. How many, did you grow up with brothers and sisters?
I have a sister.
You have a sister,
Older
okay.
Sister, yeah.
And so you grew up, and then you eventually meet your wife. And so how was she from Spartanburg, or was she?
She was born in Florence, mm-hmm. and spent 8 years in Florence, and her parents then moved to Charlotte. Mm-hmm. And I met her at the picnic in Gastonia. You've heard about
I've heard about it. I've not been there. Yeah.
Every August, the Cartier Park. I met her there.
And so this was a picnic where Orthodox Christians from all over South Carolina would go to, and also North Carolina.
All over the country.
Oh, it was that. Is it still that way, or was it just?
It used to be. I don't know. I haven't been there many years, but there'd be 1,200 people, 1,000 people there over the weekend, from every state in the union, I believe. It started out as like a brotherhood by the people that came from my father's village, mm-hmm. Cartier.
Now, for people listening, villages are important amongst Greeks.
Yeah.
It's sort of like states in America. Yeah. It's important if you come from Georgia, if you come from South Carolina. Yeah. So these people who were from one specific village, specifically from your father's village.
Yeah, my father's village, yeah.
started doing this picnic every year, and then
It just grew. It just grew from just a few people. In I think it was 27. There's just a handful of people. Eventually, it gets about 1,000, 1,200 people.
wow. And was it that big when you met your wife?
Yeah.
There was that many people?
Yeah.
Huh.
A lot of Greek music and Greek food and dancing and just, yeah.
So you how old are you when you met your wife?
16.
16. So you were young.
She was 15.
She was 15. Okay. And did you get married right away, or was
5
it
years?
5 years? Okay.
Took me 5 years to convince her to.
Well, she was worth working for, I'm sure.
Oh yeah.
Now you served in the military. Between 16 and 21 were you in the military?
Yeah,
Okay.
in the Army. Yeah.
In the Army. Okay. Did you serve overseas?
Germany.
Oh, you served in Germany. So was that during war?
No, peacetime.
Peacetime. Okay.
My oldest son was born in Germany.
Really?
George.
Okay.
Born in the Army hospital there.
Wow. Okay.
And I brought Liz over, and luckily, we found a Greek church in Frankfurt.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. And what size was that? Was that a small Greek church?
Oh,
or was it...
very small. The Germans gave the property to the Greek community after the war. They built a spot, almost a chapel, really.
So it was a newly built chapel
Yeah.
specifically for the Greeks. Okay.
Yeah, we met the priest and became very good friends with him. He's a wonderful man, one of the finest men I've ever known in my life. But he baptized George, and we were there with him. And my parents came over too.
So they flew for the ceremony, baptism.
Yeah.
And George, so you ended up having how many kids?
4.
4 kids. So George was the first. Okay.
Yeah.
And then, okay, so how old are you at that point?
I was in my early 20s.
Early 20s, okay. So you come back to America, and you return back to your home church. And what year do you think that was when you returned back?
1959.
1959, okay.
December, so 1960, you might as well say.
Okay. And was the church really growing at that time period after World War II?
It was growing, yeah. I'd say it was growing.
And then you had the baby boomers, so, lots of kids.
Yeah.
And,
And immigrants are still coming, quite a few immigrants.
Mm-hmm.
Back in the 50s, 50s and 60s.
So during the 1960s, probably we had our biggest increase in members from Greece, maybe.
Yeah, sure
it was. Okay. Well, trying to think. So you raised your kids in this church here in Spartanburg, and do you recall any interesting stories or people that showed up, or just trying to think about I mean, the 1960s were interesting times, and that was the time of the civil rights movement.
Yeah, it was. I think it was a bad 10 years.
It was bad, yeah.
For the whole country.
Yeah, I agree.
We lost 2 Kennedy brothers. We lost Martin Luther King. It was a.
And there was racism towards Greeks in America, especially the South, right?
Plenty of, yeah.
Yeah.
Especially my parents and my in-laws, and all the first generation immigrants really. I mean, really suffered from prejudice and bigotry, quite a bit. But
why do you think that was? Was that the difference in religion, or was it just part of was it ignorance at the time?
Hush.
And we apologize for people listening. We do have a dog here. We're trying to entertain while we're doing the interview here.
Just plain ignorance and bigotry. Most of them had accents. They spoke heavy.
So it's hard. It was, but the Greeks. Were the Greeks reluctant to learn English, or were they? There was no reluctance. It's not like with the Mexicans today, where they're really trying to make the Spanish language the permanent language of some parts of America.
Yeah.
The Greeks were willing to learn English and
Oh,
speak
yeah.
English, but you couldn't get rid of your accents. I mean, it's just
No, you couldn't.
yeah.
My father didn't have much of an accent because he came at 13 years old. He was pretty young.
Oh, so he learned to speak Southern.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My father-in-law in Charlotte came to this country. He was in his 30s, so he had a heavy accent.
Okay, so there's prejudice happening. It's very tumultuous times for Americans all over, especially those in the South, because the South is going through.
Yeah.
There's these marches. There's
Well, and this is the Bible Belt,
yes,
so you got that too.
which can be a good thing for Orthodox Christians,
Should be, but
unless the Bible Belt doesn't understand the church, which is what was going on, right? Where it was.
Yeah.
Um,
And we're to blame too because we stayed within our own little circle.
mm-hmm. Do you think the Greek festivals helped to undo the?
I know it did.
You know it did?
We started
Yeah.
with Greek night, which was a big success, and then went to the festivals. But that's opened up a whole new window, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's good too.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think I'm sure there were a lot of people who may have been, hateful, towards Greeks
Oh,
that
yeah.
came to a festival, tasted the great food, and went, "Wow,
Yeah.
well, there's something to like them for." And if you start with the food, that's a place to start, right?
Yeah. That's why my mother-in-law won all the neighbors over in Charlotte, because they didn't want the neighbors didn't want them to move in at all.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't want Greeks in the neighborhood.
Really? Wow.
But with her cooking and her pastries, she stayed there 65 years. So she outstayed them all.
Did the Greeks know how to cook food this well when they moved here, or was it something they
I've often
learned?
wondered. I don't know. My father was 13. What could he possibly cook? My mother-in-law was 20.
Mm-hmm.
They just learned. They taught themselves. They had to.
And it became a means of survival, and it was a very good means of survival at some point. We've had some, restaurants do very well in South Carolina that are owned by Greeks, and I think the joke, across our area sometimes is that the Greeks own all the restaurants.
Yeah.
That certainly became the case, that the Greeks, really were good at being entrepreneurs and running family businesses and. But it's the same with other denominations as well. That the family is very important.
Yeah.
The family unit's very important to
Oh, yeah.
Orthodox Christians and
Family and church. And don't forget, I don't know what to do with her. She's never been like this.
that's okay. It's because I'm here.
But all those early immigrants really came over here to send money back to Greece so that parents could survive.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I mean, we're talking about poverty.
You're talking about the poverty in Greece.
Yeah.
So what had just happened in Greece that caused this poverty? It was war, right? Or the war, Muslim control?
That's World War II, but World War I guess, had some. They poor little Greece has been walked over by everybody in the world, so just a poor country. That's
Yeah.
all. And
And
there wasn't
before-
any tourists like it is today.
Yeah. It was the Muslims had control over it for many
Yeah, they
centuries.
suffered under the Turkish for 400 years.
Yeah.
So
And was it the late 1800s that Turkish rule ended, or was it the early 1900s? It was early 1900s, right?
no, 1821.
Oh, 1821. Okay.
But still, 400 years of that. It's kind of.
It kind of sticks, and it's hard to move to. You still have the remnants of Muslim control probably in Greece.
Well, in Turkey especially.
Yeah.
But you go to Greece today, any village, and it's rebuilt, and you wouldn't think it was the same place.
Have you made those trips back to Greece?
Yeah.
You have. Okay. What is it? Have you visited your father's home village?
My father's and my in-laws' village too, both of them.
So what's that like when you go back and they realize that you were a descendant of the village? Or do you just show up and say, "Hey, I'm a native," or my dad was a native, or do you
They'll throw a party.
they'll throw a party for you?
Yeah, they'll throw a party. But I went in 54, in 68, and the village, both of them, both villages were pretty badly burned out by then. They hadn't been rebuilt yet. So after 68, and of course now if you go, it's just all brand new homes and
Yeah.
all the electricity. There was no electricity or water when we went. Same thing with my mother-in-law's house. It was still burned out from the war.
Do you think the reason why Greece has I know it's not prospering like America's prospered. There's still, issues, major issues that Greece has had financially and economically. But do you think a lot of the reason it's prospered is because of the Greek Americans that have sent money back and that have...
Oh, I know it is. If it wasn't for the American dollar,
Greece would still be...
You take all our Greeks here in Spartanburg that still go back every summer. Mm-hmm. They rebuilt the family home.
Oh, they did? It's that important to them to rebuild the family home?
Oh, yeah. So almost all the houses have been rebuilt now, all the villages.
Let's go back to the civil rights movement, because I do want to... There was a lot of racism in the South. There was segregation.
Oh, yeah. Oh, the country was segregated.
And we're not saying every original Southerner agreed with that segregation. But the Greeks were heavily against segregation, if I remember from my studies. Am I correct?
Yeah.
And so...
they were against any bigotry and prejudice, because they'd suffer so much themselves.
Mm-hmm. And do you think the a lot of Greeks sort of grouped themselves with the Black Americans in the South, as far as the persecution they were going through? Was there some sort of understanding amongst...
Might have identified maybe with it because of that.
Yeah. But there wasn't like a closeness where the cultures were...
No, they intermingled, no.
Yeah.
Like I say, the Greek community stayed strictly with the Greek community.
And that's because that was what most people were comfortable with.
Well, they were all immigrants and just beginning to learn the language and the lifestyle, and but they integrated beautifully throughout the community. Mm-hmm. There was no such thing as a Greek ghetto.
Oh, that's important to understand. Okay, so, and why was that not the case? Why was there no such thing as a Greek ghetto?
I don't know if you've ever heard of Rosalind Boyd.
No.
She's passed away. She wrote a book about the Greeks in Spartanburg.
Okay.
And how they made it a point not to gather all in one section. Like the Harakas were up there, by the church.
Yeah.
We lived down here off of Spring Street.
Mm-hmm.
The other South Church Street. So they were at Converse Heights. So they were scattered all over town. So there was no ghetto. But we won our neighbors over by doing that too.
Well, that's a great strategy.
Yeah.
I mean, that's...
If I can find that book, you'd probably enjoy reading that.
Yeah. What's it called again?
The Greeks of Spartanburg.
Okay.
Jesse Boyd, that's why the school is named after her husband, Jesse Boyd. He was an attorney here in town.
Now, was Jesse Boyd Greek, or did he he married a Greek?
No.
No, okay, so...
His wife's the one that wrote this book about the Greeks.
Oh, but she wasn't Greek. She was just interested in writing about the Greeks of Spartanburg.
Her husband was my father's attorney and good friends for years.
Oh, so that's how that happened. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, she grew to love the Greeks and wanted to write a book about...
Well, they couldn't, like I say, there was no ghetto. I'll have to look and see if I can find that book. I'll bring it to church one day or something.
Okay. And that is where the discussion ended. Thank you, everybody, for listening, and especially thank you, Nick, for sharing such valuable information.